cloud. All right, so we've got a file to download from today, productform.xlsm. We've actually worked with this file once before. I don't remember exactly what we were doing with it. Oh, it was on the debugging day, so it was back on the 10th of October. So this is data that we've seen before. It's like product data from an outdoor store. So get stuff for like duck calls, and there's like bows and mink oil, and I don't know, saddle soap. Anyway, so we got several hundred then different products here. So the idea here then, as we're working with user forms today, is we want to be able to create a form that we can take all the information from one row and then just display it onto the screen at a time. So we don't have to scroll over to get it. We can just kind of get it all there and be able to add other additional logic to it. And so let's go ahead and take a look. So I'm going to come into my Visual Basic editor. And now a few times we have inserted a module. So anytime we start with a blank workbook, we got to have some place to put the code that we're saving. That's got to go into a module. And that's true. The only place that we save VBA code is in a module. The only kind of module we've worked with so far has been what's called a general module, where it just says module here. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert not a module, but I'm going to insert a user form. So I'll click user form. Now the user form has a module built into it as well. But there are some things that are really different about doing code for a user form than everything we've done so far. And the big thing is that it's going to introduce kind of a new construct for us. So we've talked about like objects. Objects have properties. They have properties and methods. But a new idea here is now something called an event. So and there are a couple of different places that we can use events in VBA, but they're very pronounced in user forms. So normally when we make we've got a sub-procedure that we want to run, how do we have the user run that sub-procedure? What are some of the ways that we've allowed the user to invoke a sub-procedure? So yeah, we did one example. We put a button onto a sheet, and so we click that button, it would run the user form. Sorry, it would run the sub-procedure. We've used like a shortcut key. So press Control-Shift-S or something, and it would run that. And of course, you can run it from directly inside the VBA environment. You can come in here and run it. Those are the kind of the three main ways that we've seen so far how to run a sub-procedure. The idea of event brings a new way to think about how are we going to run a sub-procedure. And so many objects have the notion of an event. They can essentially respond to an event. So when an object receives a particular event, we can say, all right, go ahead and make the code run. So one object is like the workbook. So we could make code run when the workbook opens. We can say, find where that object is defined and change the code that's on the event for that object. And then as soon as that workbook opens, as long as the VBA is enabled, we can run the sub-procedure. So without the user actually saying, I want to run the sub-procedure, which is what we've done so far, either by clicking the button, doing the hotkey, or clicking the play button in the VBA environment, we can say, because they did something in Excel, that's when we can run a sub-procedure. And so it's kind of a step. It's something new for us. And to do that, we have to say, all right, we've got to pick first the object we want to manipulate, and then we got to pick the event that we want to respond to. So let's go ahead and start off just by putting a button on this form. So if your toolbox isn't, so we got to get this toolbox showing. If your toolbox isn't showing, then right up here, we've got this little tool on our toolbar in the VBA editor. It looks kind of like a hammer with a wrench across. To me, it looks vaguely communist. I'm always a little bit uncomfortable to click on it, but that will open up this toolbox. And so so we have several objects here that we can bring onto the form. Now, these objects that are visual objects that we put onto the form, they're called controls. It seems like a weird thing to call the object. That's just what they're called. So when I have a visual object that goes onto a form, it's called a control. And so I'm going to first start off with this control right here called the command button control. And so I'm just going to bring that, I'm going to click on that tool and then come over here and click to drag to make that button on the form. And I could, select it and kind of drag it around and move it to some other place, but I'm gonna kind of put it here in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, this is a control. It's a visual object on a form, but it has it's an object. So it has methods and properties like any other object does. Now, most of these properties are going to be available to us at runtime. So now right over here, we've got this properties window showing. If this is not showing, you're going to choose View Properties Window or press F4, and that will bring that window open, which is the properties that I can manipulate of this control here at design time. There may be some properties that are only available when the form is running, and we can't see those here. So it's not all the properties, but it's the ones that we can manipulate while we're developing this. Let me start off by changing the caption. So the caption property is what determines what appears on the face of the button. And so here, why don't I just go ahead and I'm going to call this save. All right, so this is now the save button. When the user clicks this, we want it to save. And maybe it'll be like save and we'll close the form as well. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is I would like to have this object respond to some event happening to it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to double click on the button itself. That's going to take me to the module that's built into the user form. So that should bring up my user, the module here. And you'll see that, actually, before I do this, I want to change the name of it. So I'm going to delete that. It kind of made this subprocedure. I'm going to delete that subprocedure and close this. Actually, let me kind of show you these two buttons up here. So here in your Project Explorer, if your Project Explorer is not showing, you'll choose View Project Explorer, or Control R will open that up. And these two buttons right here kind of switch back and forth between the form view and the module view. So these will allow us to just kind of pop back and forth between the two main parts of the form that I'm working on. I want to come back to the form view of this, and I want to change the name of this object. Every time I put a new control on my form, it's going to get a name. It's going to get a default name. This is command button 1. If I added another command button, it would get a name command button 2. And when you're first doing this, you might think that's okay, but we really need to give these better names so that when we're looking at our code, we can know what's going on with it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to the very first property, my property window, when I have the button selected, and I'm going to change it from command button 1. And this is the save button. It's a command button, but it's going to do the save operation. And so I'm going to name it this way, CMD, which is going to let me know this is a command button when I see it in the code, and then save. So CMD save. The name of that object is going to show up in several different places in my code. And so I'm going to want to make sure that when I see the reference to it, I know just which one we're talking about. So, starting this off with like a 3-letter prefix that kind of says what kind of control it is a convention that is followed pretty globally. And you'll see that it can be very handy to know what kind of object it is by looking at the name. Okay, so now that that's named, I'm going to go ahead and double click on the button itself, which will not only take me to the code, but it will also say, oh, you're interested in working on that particular object. And so here it has made a subprocedure, and it says, all right, the name of the object is CMD save, and it's saying, this is a procedure that's going to respond when the user clicks. And so we have the name of the object underscore the name of the event is what it takes to create a subprocedure that will automatically respond to an event. So let me just come in here and put a message box, MSGBOX. Ready to save. Now we're going to get to actually saving the data, but at this point, we just want to be able to see that we've invoked that button. And I can run this form just here in development mode by clicking on the play button. So as long as I'm editing over here in the code for the form, or if the form is what's active, and I click the play button, it will it'll bring that form up. And so now if I click on that button, when this object receives the click event, it will trigger that code to be executed, ready to save. Okay, so it's just executing that code. And that seems like a reasonable thing. I mean, what else would you do? What else would you want to do? What other event might you want to respond to except, clicking on the button? But the fact is, there are lots of other events to choose from. I want to show you now how to do a different one. So these two drop-down lists have been here in our editor since the beginning, and we've never done anything with them. And so this one here allows us to either say, this is going to be just a general procedure, not tied on to any object, or it can be one tied on to one of our objects. Which objects do we have? We have the command button that we added to the form, and we have the form itself. So I'm going to say, yeah, I'm interested in working on the command button object. And now over here, I have a whole list of events that I can choose from. So now over here, click is already programmed. That's why it shows in black. But I would like to do mouse move. I'm going to make it so that this code now gets executed when this button, the save button, receives not the click event, but the mouse move event. What do you think the mouse move event is? Yeah, it's if the mouse moves, if it changes which pixel it's pointing at, just even by one pixel, that will trigger this event. And when it does that, it's going to pass other information into this sub procedure. It's going to pass in which mouse button is selected, if the shift key is down, and it's going to give you an X and a Y coordinate as to where that event is happening inside the boundary of the button. And I don't really care about any of those things. I just want to know when that, when that event has happened. So when we click on this, it's going to put the message box up ready to save. But when the mouse moves over it, and this is something that'll be kind of fun, but it's and maybe only useful on April Fool's Day. But we're going to make it so that when the mouse moves on that button, the button is going to move to some different location on the form. So as soon as you get the mouse there to try to click on it, it's going to trigger the mouse move event, and it's going to move to a different location. So this object, this control, has a property called left, which says, where's the left of this? How many pixels from the left of the form does this button start? And so I'm going to say the name of my object, which is CMD save, and the property is left. And I want to make that equal to some random number. So RND will give me a random number between 0 and 1. And I'm going to multiply that random number, multiply that by the width of the form. So the form, so I've got the whole form itself. Now the form has a name. I haven't changed it. Right now it's still called user form 1. Oh, I already had a product on this. Like I gave you the wrong file. I gave you the file like already done. Ignore the form product form. Like that's where we're headed. So this form is called user form 1. I'm probably going to change that, but it turns out that when I have, so you're familiar with this workbook, right? It says it's a reference to a particular workbook. Which workbook is it? It's whichever one has the code in it. There's something similar for a user form. If I want to refer to the user form that has this code on it, it's actually ME. So me, that refers to the user form that has the code. So I'm saying I want to refer to my user form, and I'm going to ask for what is called the inner width, the inside width. So the inside width, so the width of the form is like the outside width of the form, but there's a border on the form. And that border can be different widths depending on how it's configured. So I want to know what the inside width of the form is, because that's really the space I have to work with for placing this button. And so by this random number between 0 and 1 times the width of the form is going to change the left property of that button to be somewhere different. So let's go ahead and see it. The whole thing I'm trying to demonstrate here is that now when this object, command save, receives the mouse move event, it will trigger this code. So as soon as the mouse is moving, is the mouse move event happening right now? The event is happening, but it's happening to which object? Which object is receiving that event? the form itself is doing it. But as soon as that event happens, such that it sends it to the button, it's going to give me a random. Is it possible to click on this button? Yeah, but only if it happens to move right under. It's happened a couple of times where it happened to pop underneath it, but I made another, it did it again. Did you see how it did the kind of that double move there? It was like a separate mouse movement that happened. Oh. Anyway, fortunately, I can hit the space button because it's active. You know, we could actually still can get to it. All right, but let's see. You may notice that it's going. Yeah, there it's actually going off because I'm saying the left can go anywhere from 0 to the whole width of the form. So let's do this. Let's say inside width minus the width of the button. CMD save dot width. And so now it's saying, you know, it can't go I can't put the left of this button on the whole width of the form. I'm kind of restricting that down so I'll always be able to see the whole button. So that's good. But if I'm really going to do this, we should get this moving around, not just left to right, but top to bottom as well. So let's change the top to a random portion of the inside height minus the height of the button. And now it should move not just to a random position horizontally, but vertically as well. It's going to be a little harder to track down. Now, I'm going to do one more thing here. I'm going to write this, and let's see if you guys can tell me what this is doing. So each time this moves, I'm going to do cmd.save or cmd save dot width equals what it used to be. Okay, so by adding this line, what is that going to do to my form or to my button? Yeah, it's going to make it smaller. So each time it moves, and it's not, I mean, just 2 at a time is not very much. So I'm going to move it a few times before I think, wait a minute, that button is getting smaller. Oh my gosh. Am I going to get it? I think I've just made some kind of great new video game. Poof, it's gone. Okay. Again, the point here is just to realize that it's not just the kind of a normal thing that you might expect to happen, but I can pick the object and pick the event and then just make the code execute in response to that. Let's add one more thing to this code so it doesn't annoy me for the rest of this example. And that is, I'm going to only do this if the month of our current time, NOW, is equal to 4, and the day of our current time is equal to 1, then we'll do this. So when is this going to move around? Yeah, so on April Fool's Day, this button will behave that way. Any other day, it'll be just like normal. Otherwise, each time I try to click on that, I'll forget and it will like move and I'll. Okay. So that's the idea of an event-driven programming. So when the event happens, that's what triggers the code. Show me how comfortable you are with this idea of objects responding to events. 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Thank you. Okay. Well, let's actually make this form show some data and probably even have time to get it editing and saving data as well. All right, so I'm going to come back to editing the form. So I'll click on my little form editor here, and let's go ahead and name it. So instead of form product, let's call it FRM prod. So I've got the form selected, and just by, if my button was selected, I could just click anywhere on the background of the form. The form is now selected. And I'm going to change the name from user form 1 to just be FRM prod. FRM prod. File access error. I did not expect that to give me an error. Did that give you an error? Am I still running it right now? It's not running. Interesting. Let me save it. Oh. Gone. Right. I'd kind of like to recover that. So let's see, version 1. Who knows what got saved here? I don't want to do that. I want to enable content. Alt F11. User form 1. Well, I lost the mouse move code here, but you know what? It's probably on form product. It's probably very similar. Looks like maybe the same thing happened there, and I lost it last time we did this example as well. So it's in the video. So hopefully, if you really want to see that code, you can go look at it in the video. All right. So ready to save. Now, what I was trying to do is I was trying to rename this form. So user form 1, I'm going to call it FRM prod. That feels a lot better. Maybe I'll go ahead and save this while I'm at it. So I'm going to browse and save this in my downloads. And I'll call it product form fall 22. Okay. Ready to save. This looks fine. All right. So I've renamed the form, and I'm now kind of editing the. I want to be editing the form again. My Excel is just not behaving the way I think it should be behaving. Form prod. And the form. Here it is. Okay. Okay, so the data that I have to bring on here for one of these, let's go ahead and put the product ID. I'm going to bring the product ID in, but I'm not going to have the user editing the product ID. So this product ID is just going to be a place to display the information, not editable. And so I'm going to use the first control. The very first one that shows up here, this first tool is, it's actually the absence of any other tools, of any control selected. So I'm coming here thinking, which one of these things do I want to make? I'll select that tool. But then this one just unselects that. So it just kind of says no control is selected. So the first control here is this thing called a label. So I'm going to select that control, and I'm going to just kind of draw that label here in the upper left-hand corner. And I'm going to format this to kind of look like it's a field. So right now it's just looks like just like text, like the background color is the same background color as my form. So I'm just going to change the formatting of this a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and put a border on it. Give myself a little bit of space in there. And the border style right now is none. I'm going to change that to single. I think that's my only other choice. Okay, and this looks like the color is already, kind of black. I think a black border is fine. I could change the border color to a different color if I wanted to. But I'm going to change the background color as well. So border color, back color. I'm just going to make this. Oh, this is interesting because it can read the color like from your system settings. Say, oh, Windows is configured to show like these different settings. You can have them differently. I'm just going to make it like a fixed color. So I'll come here to palette, and I'll choose kind of a darker gray. Oops, I had the wrong thing selected. I kind of like to undo that. Back color. I'm not sure what color that used to be. Was one of the system ones. Inactive border. Let me just go ahead and select this because I think it was the same color. So back color here is button face. So we'll make that button face as well. Okay, now make sure I've got this label selected, and I'm going to change the back color to be just a little bit darker. So that's going to indicate to me it's got a gray background. It's not going to be editable. I'm going to change the alignment of the text in this to be centered. So again, with that selected, there's a text align property down here. I'm going to change that to text align center. Okay. Now, this is going to hold my product ID. So I'm going to name this one, not the form, but the label. I'm going to name this one LBL ID. LBL ID. Now, as soon as this form gets open, I would like to read the current, I want to put the ID from the current row on there. So I've got code, I've got to make code execute. So what object and what event should I be thinking about to make that code execute, to actually put the product ID onto that list box? I don't have many objects to choose from at this point. I have the form and I have the button. So which object should I be thinking about to put this code on, put this code behind? There's only two objects to choose from, the form and the button. Someone guess one. The form. We'll use the form. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to double click the form. And it's going to take me to the code here, and it's going to guess, oh, you probably want to make some code execute when the user clicks on the form. No, I don't want to do that. But now the user form is selected here. I'm going to choose a different event. So come take a look at this list of events and think, what's the right event for me to choose for this? Just kind of look at the names of those events and say, what might be the right event? What might be an event to work with here? When this form opens up, that's when I want to run the code. Unfortunately, there's no open event. Activate is a pretty good choice, and that would work for us. It's going to have a little more overhead, and so we're not going to use activate. There's another one. I'll tell you the difference here in just a minute when we get to it. Initialize is the one that we want. So a form can be kind of in three different places. It can be just as a part of the workbook, but not loaded into memory. So it's kind of defined in the workbook, and that's where it is when the workbook first opens. That form is not loaded, and so it's just sitting as a part of the workbook. When I first load it into memory, then that's when the initialize event happens. That's when I'm saying, all right, we're kind of getting ready to show this. We haven't shown it yet. We've loaded it into memory and we can configure it. We can change all the properties about it. We can do whatever we want to it. And then we can show it. And when we show it, that's when it gets activated. Now, if I've got multiple forms open, I can actually go back and forth between two forms. And each time I select one, it gets activated. So the activate event happens. I want this to happen just when this form first loads up into memory. And so I'm going to choose initialize. So initialize is what gets executed when this form is first coming to life. And here's what I'd like to do. I would like to say, well, I don't want to put, I'm going to have a lot of things that are happening when I'm showing this data. So rather than write that all here and initialize, I'm going to make another sub procedure. I'll put it right at the very top, and I'm going to call this show data. And so I'm just going to have my initialize. I'm going to have my initialize is going to call show data. But there is one other thing I'd like to do. I want to kind of keep track of what row we're currently on. And I could probably read it from the active, from the row of the active cell, but I just want to put that into a variable so I know that I've got it. So let's do this. Let's make a module level variable. So not inside of any sub procedure, just declare a module level variable up here called row, and I'll make that a long integer. When I'm referring to a row, I like to use long integer because then any row, long integer is plus or minus 2 billion. And so it can handle any row number that we've got. And now when this form gets initialized, I just want to read what the row of the active cell is. And I'm going to save that in this module level variable. So I'm going to say row equals active cell dot row. So now when this user form gets initialized, it's going to remember the row that it's on, and then it's going to call show data. And so I want to do all the work of actually showing the data on the form in this other sub procedure, just because these event sub procedures, I like to keep them kind of lean just for organization's sake. So what is really happening in response to this event? We're keeping track of what row it's on, and then we're showing the data. And the showing the data is going to get it's going to be quite a few lines of coding. Okay, so now inside of show data, I just want to put some information into the caption of that label. Well, it's called LBLID, and it has a property called caption. And I want to set that equal to something new. What do I want it to be? Well, I want it to be my worksheet. Now, if I look up here, my worksheet, it's actually, I have a worksheet that has products shown on the tab for that worksheet, but its code name is data. So I'm just going to say data dot cells. Which row do I want? Whichever is in the row variable, right? Because I read the active row when this thing got initialized. So that's the row I want. The column that I want is column number 1. And I'm going to read the value of that cell. So now when this form gets loaded into memory, it's going to say, let's remember which row we're on. And then let's use that row to read the data off of the worksheet and put it here into the form. And I think it is column 1. Yeah, the product ID is in column 1. So I'm going to be down here on row number 14. It's got kind of a longer product number here. It's the Canada Goose floater. And so when I run this, it now has opened that user form, and it has put that product ID right here into that label. The user cannot edit this. It is just, I can change this. We can see I can change it through code, which is what I did to make it show that, but the user can't change this. So a label, as far as the user is concerned, is static text. Okay. Questions here? Do we need, is that working for everyone? Because if this is not working, now would be a good time for us to kind of get that fixed. We're moving on to other things. All right, now I'd like to put on something that the user can edit. And so for that, I'm going to use a text box. I'm going to come back to my form. And my next one over here is a text box. So I'm going to select that tool. And I'm just going to draw that then right in next to my label. It's a little bit bigger. Now I could add a label on here that says product name, but since I'm using this to edit, not to enter new ones, it's going to show the existing name. I'm not sure I need to actually put a label that says, by the way, this is the product name. And so let's just go ahead and name this as a text box. So I'm going to call it TXT and then just name, TXT name. And I want to read the value into that property as well when the thing gets, when I'm showing the data. So I'll come back to my code, and under show data, I called that TXT name. How I wish there was a caption property, but there's no caption property of a text box. The text box does have a text property. And so that's what actually puts the value there for the user to edit. So I'm going to change the text property of that object and set it equal to same row, column number 6, if memory serves. Let me just go check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so I could say column F or column 6. So now when I'm showing the data, it's going to write into this label, the ID, and it's going to write the name then into that text box. We'll go ahead and run it again. And so now I'm getting that. I'm just getting that. Now this one can be changed. So I don't know what spearmint is, but I'm going to change that to double mint. And when I click save, what's going to happen? It's just going to display a message box. It's not going to save anything because I haven't written any code to actually save it yet. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'm going to come down to my save. I don't think I need to say ready to save anymore, so I'll get rid of that. And I'm just going to put the same thing down here. Now, in this case, I am reading from the worksheet and putting it onto this control of the form. When I save, I just want to do the opposite. I want to read from the form and put it onto that cell in the worksheet. So showing the data is read from the worksheet, put it onto the form, saving it is here. In fact, I probably want to say save data. So we make another sub called save data. Put that line in save data. And then from my event, I'm just going to call save data. So now if I make a change, it should actually change the data in the worksheet. So I'm going to come over here and run this. Change this to double mint. Click save. And we can see it saved to the worksheet. Questions? Okay. Next thing I'd like to do is I'd like to put some data validation onto this. So before I save this to the worksheet, I'm going to check and make sure that what they typed in meets some rules. So before I get to the save, or before I get to the actual line that writes the data out to the worksheet, let's just do some data validation. What might be a valid rule we want to enforce about the name of any of these products? I'm going to say that a name is not allowed to be blank. You've got to have at least one character for the name. It probably should be, could probably get by with 2 or 3 characters, but I'm going to say it can't be blank. So I'm going to just write a rule right here. If the length of looking at the text property of that text box is less than 1, then we want to do something. What do we want to do? Put up a message box that tells the user something's gone wrong. Message box, the name cannot be blank. The product name cannot be blank. It turns out I have like some other properties I can put in this. And one of them is I can say the next property here or the next attribute is VB critical. So that will put a particular icon on the dialog box and it will use the critical error sound, however that's configured in Windows. And the next argument is like the caption of the message box. I'm just going to say data error. Now, as this goes right now, let's just go ahead and do it. I'm going to go ahead and run this. I'm just going to delete this. And we're going to watch what happens. I've got it over here, kind of right underneath where the data is. I'm going to say save. I expect that to trigger my warning message. The product name cannot be blank. But watch what happens when I click OK. It went ahead and edited the data. What do I want it to do? Like if it fails this, what do I want it to do? Like nothing. So what do I do? What do I add here so that we bypass this? What's that? Yeah, let's just exit function or exit sub. EXIT sub. And I could have any number of these kind of if statements here that checks to see if this, if I've got some price, the price can't be negative, the price has to be positive. There's kind of other rules we might want to enforce about this, and we can put all that right here. Question?
You don't want to allow like special characters in the name. You have to do one by one. There is there?
Oh, so let's say we only want to limit it just to kind of basic characters. So yeah, we'd have to look across. We could write a function that looks across that and make sure that the ASCII value of all the characters in a specified range. We could do that. I'm not going to do that at the moment, but we could. But yeah, we can kind of write, kind of any logic we want here that, could check to make sure it's, meets the, in fact, let's change it one thing. Let's do this. Not just the name of, not just the length of the name, but why don't we trim this? That's going to prevent someone from just putting in a space as well. So I'm going to look at the name, I'm going to trim it, take off any leading and trailing spaces. And if the length of that is less than 1, I'll put up that same error message. Okay. What I'd like to do next is I would like to kind of show you how to open this form through code. So right now we're just running it from our development environment. Let's see how to invoke this from code. So it looks like we've already got a module here, regular general module. So let's come to this module. And I'm going to make another sub procedure here called edit product. And all edit product is going to do is it's going to show that form. So edit product. And here's how we show that form. I'm going to refer to the name of the form, which is frmprod. And then I'm going to say show, formprod.show. It takes an argument here as being either modal or not. The default is to make it modal, meaning that when that form comes open, you've got to address that form before you go and do anything else. And that's modal is true. If I change that to false, it will let the form be open and I can go back and forth between the worksheet and the form, but the form will still be there. I think the normal way to do this is to make them modal. That's the default. But if you say, I want this up, but you come over here and work on the worksheet, you can do that as well, just by putting false here. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and assign a hotkey to this one. I'm going to make like Control-Shift-E. So Control-Shift-E will be to edit the product on the current line. So I'm going to come back to my workbook, and I'm going to come to my Developer tab, Macros, select Edit Product, and add options. I think the only time we've ever put a shortcut key is when we were recording. But if I come here and select options, I can now add the shortcut key as well. I'll put a capital E there, and now Control-Shift-E should open up the form on my current record. I'll cancel this and come Control-Shift-E, and it brings up that particular one. Control-Shift-E brings up the form for that. Now, it looks like it says user form 1 in the title here. So let's go ahead and change that as well. That's just going to be a property of the form itself. So I'll come back to my form prod. And with the user form selected, there's a caption of the user form itself. I'm going to call this edit product data. So no, it's not too bad. I mean, it's not that helpful yet because it's only doing one cell, but we'll go ahead and we'll add another one on. And of course, anything that you want to edit in the same way as the text box, you could now duplicate that, right? Because it's the same, would just be the same functionality, but I want to introduce you to some of these other controls as well. All right, so let's look at this one. Let's say I'm interested in keeping track of who the manufacturer is. So fortunately, I've got over here on my lists tab, I've got a list of all the manufacturers. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort this. Go ahead and sort this alphabetically. I'm just going to select that whole set of data and then just sort it. Sort A to Z. Oops. Cancel. Sort A to Z with a current selection. That'll just sort that manufacturer. So what I'd like to do is I don't want the user to type in the manufacturer. I want the user to pick that manufacturer from this list. And so that's going to take a different control. So let's go ahead and build that control. So in fact, for this one, maybe I will put a label on that says manufacturer. So I'm going to add a label control here, put it right below my other label that just says manufacturer. Change the caption. Now, because I'm not going to be referring to this, I'm not going to change this. That's going to be static text, both for the user and from my perspective. That's not going to change. Because I'm not going to change this, I'm not going to be referring to it through code. I don't care what this control is called. Right now it's called, what is it, label 1 or label 2? It's called label 1. I think that's a fine name. If I was going to refer to it through code, I'd change the name, but I'm not. So I'll leave that then as label 1. And I'm going to bring on my next control here called a combo box. So a combo box is called a combo box because it's a combination of a text box. You can edit it like a text box, or you can pick it from a list, like a list box. So it's a combination between a list and a text box. Let's go ahead and bring that combo box on. So make it just a little bit hair bigger. Here now is my manufacturer. And let me go ahead and call this, I'm going to give this one a name. I'm going to call this CBO MFR. CBO combo box and then MFR. It's my manufacturer combo box. The combo box is substantially more complex than the text box because it's not just read the text that's there and put it in. I mean, that's how I'm going to get the current one to show, but I also have to build the list of possible items in it. So let's take a look at that one. So I'm going to come to the code for my form. And when we show data, we'll put a comment here that we're configuring the manufacturer's combo box. And so the way that I put a manufacturer into this, say manufacturer adventure 16, is by referring to the name of the combo box, CBO MFR dot, and there's one called add item. It's the first one. It's a method called add item. I then am going to just give it the string that I want to add to it, and that's going to put that item in the list to choose from. It's not going to make it show in the combo box. It's not going to show there. We'll get to that in a second. Let's first just put the list in. So right now, it's just going to put a single value. If I run this, if I drop this down, I've just got one choice in there. But I'd like to have all of these. So let's just make a loop that will loop across and do that. Should be pretty straightforward. Maybe I'll go ahead and declare a row variable here, dim r as long. Then just before my combo box, we'll set r equal to 2. And we'll make a loop, do until. It looks like the code name for this worksheet with my lists on is lists. Do until lists dot cells. What row are we talking about? Row number R, column number E. Until we'll run into a blank cell. We will add into it then not hard coded, but we'll add into whichever one we're. Scan across, read across all those manufacturers, insert them into the list for that combo box. And that should now make that list fully specified. So we've got all the manufacturers to choose from. Finally, I just want to set the actual text of that. And I do that the same way I would do a text box. So I'll say CBO MFR dot text is equal to, and then wherever the manufacturer data is. And I don't know the column for that. So that is in column D. So now when this form shows, it should bring up the manufacturer that was currently selected and let me change it to a different one. So what was I on? I'm on the first one here. So change that to a different one and say save. And it's not saving it yet because the only one we have coded is the text box. So we got to go ahead and make it do that one again, but that's going to be easy. That's going to be same thing. We just reverse this line and we should be in good shape. Oops. Come down here to save data. And now it should be the case that if I'm on this one, Control-Shift-E, and change it to a different manufacturer, we'll save it, and we'll see the manufacturer change. Questions? All right, let's move on to a different kind of control. We may have enough time to get the next example completed, but maybe not. All right, so I'm coming back to my form. And let me add in here the department. So the department, I'm going to use two different controls for the department. Now, the nice thing about what I've done here with this, and this is going to be another way to pick from a list. So over here, because I'm reading this, it's going to be really easy for the user to add a new manufacturer. What do they have to do to add a new manufacturer? Just come to the bottom of this list and put another manufacturer in here. And the next time that form loads, that manufacturer will be in the list to choose from. So what I'm about to show you is one that is a kind of a different interface, but it should be for things that change only rarely, if ever. Because to add a new choice here, it will take a change in the code to do. And this is going to be with what are called option buttons. So adding a new department, we would expect to happen much less regularly than adding a new manufacturer. So it's kind of an okay choice to use option buttons for this. So my department has these four options, and I'm going to put radio buttons. You're familiar with them. They're sometimes called radio buttons. The VBA word for them is option buttons, but it's because when you select one, it automatically unselects the others. But I'm going to group them inside a frame. So before I put the option button on, I'm going to choose this tool right here called a frame. And that's what's going to let me kind of bind that set of option buttons together. So option buttons in a frame will work independently from option buttons in another frame. So I could have, three sets of these option buttons. I could have three chosen, and the frame is what's going to kind of isolate them from each other. So I'm not going to refer to the frame through code, but I do want to change the caption on the frame to say department. And then I will create inside that frame my option buttons. I'll come and bring an option button on, and then I will click and drag inside that frame. And this one, I'm going to name OPT, apparel, A-P-P-A-R-E-L. How do you spell apparel? A-P-P-A-R-E-L. So I've named it apparel. I'm going to change the caption to be apparel. And now I've got the first of four option buttons that I need. So I'm just going to copy that down a couple of times. Try to get them evenly spaced out. And then just configure them to be, for the others. What's after apparel? Outdoor. Oh, maybe I'll go ahead and sort these here while I'm at it. So apparel, general, hunting, and outdoor. I'm going to change those two properties on each one of these. The name of this one will be OPT general. And the caption will be general. hunting. Caption will be hunting, and then outdoor. So now when this runs, we've got that block now showing here, but we have to add some code now to actually make it select the right value. Okay, we need another minute to be able to get those configured. Or are we ready to go? Ready to go? Okay, now what's interesting about this is that these option buttons, although they will work together in the sense that when I select one, it unselects the others, I have to think of them as each individually as a Boolean value of either true or false. So right now, the OPT general's value is true and the rest are false. And when we select it, it kind of articulates those. So these are all Boolean values set to true or false. And by setting one to true, it's going to automatically set the others to false. So when we show our data, back to form product, we're going to go ahead and check to see, which department it's in. So here's our department option buttons. And I think I'm going to do this with a select statement or a select. So select case and select. And we're going to be looking at wherever the manufacturer is or where the department is. So the department is in column C. So select case, looking at our row in column C. And then we're going to kind of do that same thing. If that says apparel, then we're going to set OPT apparel, its value equal to true. And we've got general. Hunting. And outdoor. And actually, if it's not, let's do this. Rather than doing general there, I'm going to go ahead and do outdoor as the option. Because general is kind of like an other. So we're going to look for apparel, outdoor, or hunting. If it's not any of those, then we'll say case else. We're going to set opt general equal to true. So if in the cell it says hunting, we're going to set opt hunting to true. If it says outdoor, we'll set opt outdoor to true, and so forth. And if it's none of the specific ones, it'll go to general. So now that should show the correct one selected, depending on which one we're on. So here I'm on hunting, Control-Shift-E, brings up hunting checked. I come down to something that's not hunting, outdoor is checked. Apparel is checked and so forth. But again, we're not saving that yet. So we've got to add some code to make it save. And that's going to be, something similar. But again, it was more complex to set this one. It's going to be more complex to record it as well. So I'm going to come to my save data. And I'm just going to say if, I'll do this with an if, else if structure. So if OPT apparel dot value. That's either going to be true or false, right? This will be true or false itself. This is a Boolean value. It is true or false. I can either leave it just like this, be true or false, or it's probably more comfortable to you to see it look like this. If that value is true, then we'll do something. Otherwise, we'll do something else. And what are we going to do if that's the case? If that's the case, we're going to set that cell equal to apparel. Else if, and then we've got else if one word. Okay, so if apparel value is true, we set it to apparel. If hunting is true, we set it to hunting. If outdoor is true, we set it to outdoor. Otherwise, we're going to set it to general. So now that should handle the writing then back out for this. Just see if we can change one. Control-Shift-E, change this from apparel to general. And we see that it changes. Okay, that's day 1 of 2 days on user forms. So we'll see kind of more complex kinds of things happening next time we get together. Questions? All right, folks, thanks for coming, and we'll see you next week. Class dismissed.